Welcome, Jeremy,
Hi.
to Neurodifference. It is great to have you here.
Thank you
Um,
so much for having me.
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Just wanted to give a little bit of background to our listeners on and our watchers on how we know each other. I had the privilege of volunteering with Jeremy in the International Quadball Association. Quadball is a sport based on the sport in the Harry Potter books, Quidditch. Um, would thoroughly encourage our watchers and listeners to go and check it out. It's a lot of fun, isn't it, Jeremy?
It definitely can be. I mean, it's a grassroots sport. It grew over 20 plus years into a very large organization internationally and nationally that we have today. It is the only mixed gender full contact sport in the world. And
Wow.
it is very trans inclusive, diversity inclusive, and overall a really just interesting and dynamic sport. And yes, we did work together in that space. So that was really exciting.
I look forward to discussing it more in the interview. Firstly, can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, where you're based, and when you were diagnosed as autistic?
Yeah, fun questions. So, my name is Jeremy Schleicher. I am located in New York City in the United States. And I've done a variety of different things all throughout my careers. My start was actually in nonprofit work. We were talking about quadball, Quidditch a few moments ago. I had done a lot of work with US quadball as running their events nationally. So I was the championship events manager of that sport. So I ran the national championships, regional championships, along with some really other wonderful staff and volunteers. I then moved along to the International Quadball Association, where I served as the director of operations, where I worked with Reese within the operations department as well. In addition to that, I've been a volunteer coordinator at art museums. I've been a public speaking and speech and debate teacher and coach. I've worked in finance. I've worked in health IT. IT is actually professionally my bread and butter. Currently, I work in the IT department of a law firm as a trainer where I'm working with folks and really trying to communicate with them and distill large quantities of information down to more digestible bites, especially on complex technical topics. As for my own autistic journey, I think everyone has their own unique path and finding out that they're different, finding out that they're autistic, that they're uh, interacting with the world in a way that's a little abnormal, non-typical to it. With me, it definitely was always. I mean, I remember I was very, very, very young and I didn't play with toys the same way that other kids did. I would very much just want to like sit and listen and engage and talk. I am also dyspraxic. I have some motor coordination difficulties, and that was evident from year one of my life, where we had to just really figure out how I was interacting with the spatial senses around me. As I started to grow up and was interacting with other kids in elementary school, I was definitely taking things a lot more literally. I was interacting with kids in a more mature way, is probably one way to put it, where I would not really want to play around on the playground as much. I'd want to just sit and talk and interact and really learn and be very inquisitive about folks. This sort of came to a point in early high school when I started taking on leadership roles. And I was forming organizations and I began working at that art museum. And it became really apparent that my leadership style was very direct and matter of fact. And it really wasn't taking a lot into consideration other than here's where we are, here's what needs to get done. And when you're a new and budding autistic individual and you're especially interacting with neurotypical folks, that can often create some unnecessary tension where folks are like, why are you talking to me like this? And you're like, why am I talking to you like what? And it just becomes this interaction. So from that point, it became a more formalized route of, oh, okay, so what do you have? I mean, we'll probably all remember the term Asperger's that was thrown around for a little bit of time, and all those different ways. So it's hard for me exactly to pinpoint when did I actually get a piece of paper that says, yes, you earned the certificate of autisticness. But it's definitely been something that has been an idea for a while, and it's nice to actually have a community and a label and utilize resources to engage with how we interact with the world.
I couldn't agree I couldn't agree more in terms of like having that community that understands the particular way in which um, people like us communicate, which as you say, might be unexpected for neurotypicals. And what can I ask? What was it like? You touched upon this briefly. What was it like growing up as autistic in the States?
That's the only experience I have. I would assume it's probably pretty similar to growing up autistic in the UK or growing up anywhere else autistic. But I can
I've
definitely talk about what it was like growing up autistic in general.
oh
And I
yeah,
think with yeah, go on.
sorry. Yeah, no, go on. Sorry, go on.
You're fine. So
Uh-huh.
I think sort of elaborating on what I was discussing before, it really makes you aware of the differences between yourself and neurotypical individuals. Now, of course, autism is a spectrum, and there's a lot of research coming out showing that there are a lot more folks on that spectrum than are aware of it. And actually, perhaps this spectrum really is just a spectrum from incredibly neurodiverse to incredibly neurotypical, and everyone's falling somewhere on that line. But when you're definitely on the neurodiverse end of the neurospectrum, you have to start to think about how am I interacting with my colleagues? How am I interacting with my friends, with my fellow classmates, with my teachers? What am I saying that is potentially being misinterpreted? How am I saying it in a way that would work for them? How are they saying things to me? What tones are they using? What vernacular are they using? And one of the and I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit about like benefits of autism, but I think one of the really unique skill sets that a lot of autistic folks have is the ability to really hone in on the detailed work and hone in on all those sort of hidden features that we are going to focus in and just understand a little bit better, a little more in depth. And personally, I was able to utilize that. I was able to utilize my very keen eye for details to sort of help adapt a little bit better. There's definitely a lot of conversation out there about masking versus true, authentic autistic selves. What I was able to do is I started, especially once I was in high school and realized how I was interacting with folks, I began to kind of utilize other words that other people were using. I would restate myself. I would sometimes, if I wasn't exactly sure how to best frame something, I would just flat out say, I know that this is going to sound kind of harsh, but please understand where I'm coming from. I'm really just trying to do this, but insert thing there. And it also depends on the general audience. And I think that was potentially the hardest thing. I could say something where it was, just thinking back to like when I was a president of a club in high school, I could say something like, I know this is going to sound kind of harsh, but no one's showing up and doing any of the things that they committed to, and we're kind of just wasting all of our time. Some folks would hear that and be like, wow, you just said we're wasting all of our time. And then other folks would hear that and be like, okay, no, like I definitely get where they're coming from because they're putting this work in and no one's doing things. And you sort of have to find that balance of how are we conveying messages in a way that's going to be receptive to everyone, it's not going to put anyone on edge, while also needing to understand where all the different mindsets are coming from.
Do you,
Unfortunately, and
oh,
I don't know if this is a oh, you're fine.
yeah, no, sorry.
Unfortunately, I don't know if this is a US. Sorry, you're saying something?
So yeah, my apologies, buddy. I no, was it, do you think that understanding that situation, do you feel as though it was because you had different social rules? Because I found through my work for an autism charity, which, as you know, I worked for an autism charity for a long time. I found that a lot of the confusion that you might have with understanding understanding people's interpretation, at least for me, would be that they had different social rules. To me, for example, and I found that it could be difficult for me to phrase my views, because I wasn't quite sure what another's social rules were.
Yeah, absolutely. It really all comes down to social rules, the social contract, how we're all interacting with each other. So, using that example that I just used, high school freshmen founded a club trying to talk to juniors and seniors and saying, hey, no one's showing up, no one's doing the things that they agreed upon, we're kind of wasting our time. In a social contract, there are two different ways of looking at that. There is the way that younger me was looking at it, which is no one's showing up, we're wasting our time, let's not do that. Not really reading anything more into it, just saying, hey, we agreed to do a thing, we're not doing a thing, we got to do a thing, or why are we even here? Very matter of fact, not rude, not calling anyone names, just very like, this is
Yeah.
what's happening and it needs to not happen because it needs to not happen because we agreed upon this thing. That is a very autistic way of looking at it. And I think when people think about autistics black and white, they think a lot of media portrayals where if you don't like someone, you'll just be like, I don't like you. That's not a very typical autistic experience. They can definitely happen. But the more black and white experience of it is that example of flat out saying, we are not doing what we said, we need to do what we said. Now, if we're looking at it through a very neurotypical lens, so that social contract, that conversation could come across as, we're not doing what we said. Implicitly, you are a failure. Implicitly, you are letting people down. Implicitly, you messed up. Implicitly, this is your fault. We have to fix that implicitly, or there will be consequences implicitly from me, implicitly, or you'll never be able to do this again. And it's all those implicit things that I think are really where a lot of this disconnect happens. Whereas 14-year-old me was really just saying, we're not doing the things we said we do, we have to do them. Full stop. All those implicit messages are coming through that social contract of, we're not doing the things we said, you're a failure, you let people down, I'm going to punish you. And then, yeah, that's going to come across as harsh. That's going to come across as weird. But those are not actually the words that are saying. And I think it's hard, especially for a lot of neurotypical individuals, people that are following the social contract, that have those implicit messages in their head. That when they say, hey, we're not doing well, what they're really thinking a lot of the time is like, you're not doing well. It really puts that level of harshness to it because they would never flat out say something like that because they, to them, would never want that implicit understanding. Whereas for an autistic individual, they might say that thing because that's it. If they wanted to say, you are failing right now, they would flat out say, you are failing right now. And it definitely is a lot of where that disconnect comes from.
Absolutely. And so, with that in mind, what was your experience entering the world of quadball like, and what advice would you give to an autistic person joining a team in the States, or in the UK, or anywhere in Asia or Europe? What advice would you give to an autistic person joining a team, or even an NGB?
Yeah, so let's start with the team level and then we'll work our way up through organization. So
Sounds
if
good.
you are interested in joining a team, if you're interested in playing, I do highly recommend if you go to internationalquadball.org or iqasport.org, sorry about that, it's iqasport.org. If you go there and you can see a list of all of the NGBs, national governing bodies, they will be able to get you in contact with local teams in your area and how you can get involved. From the autistic lens, you really want to think about your interactions with folks on a team. This is, of course, a team-based sport, so there is going to be a lot of interconnectedness. Now, thankfully, to a point, quadball doesn't require talking, really. It's a physical sport. Of course, you have to be able to communicate with your fellow teammates, but in a sport, it's definitely a lot more matter-of-fact communication. It's like, hey, head down there, guard this. It's a lot harder for those miscommunications to happen when you are just talking in the literal, but you do have to think about how things are working within the team itself. Now, it's when you move into those leadership roles, if you're leadership on your team, if you're leadership within your national governing body, like I was for US Quadball, if you move up to be International Quadball Association leadership, IQA, that's where you really want to start thinking about the autistic lens of things. And one thing that I found that was very specific to the IQA or quadball in general, actually, is that quadball as a grassroots sport, as a sport that is about 20 years old at this point, it has a lot of people in it that are incredibly personally passionate about it. That is why it has succeeded. That is why it has received international fame. Now, admittedly, it also has some international infamy. A lot of the people that know about it just know about it to make fun of it. But people know about it. We were able to grow it to that level. But because of that, there are a lot of people in NGB and International Federation leadership that have a really deep personal connection to the sport. That's why I was doing it for 15 plus years. But what is very important to think about, especially as we discussed autistic individuals as it relates to quadball, is when you are working with neurotypical people who have very personal attachments to something, it's going to amplify that example I was using a few minutes ago. If you are in a leadership space, and this happened to me multiple times, if you are in a leadership space and you have a task of holding people accountable to the work that they are doing, it is a business. We were all volunteering for it, but it is a business. There is a lot of money on the line. There are tens of thousands of people expecting you to do something and provide them a service. So when that service is not met, and you as a leader have to convey to your staff that you are not meeting expectations, you then have a heightened issue of the previous example. Because now when I am saying, hey, you didn't do your task and we need to figure out a plan to get it done, there's now this implicit level of, oh, you don't really care about quadball. You don't really care about what we're doing here. You don't care about those players. You don't care about those NGBs. And that is not what you're saying. You were just saying, hey, we let them down. You let them down, potentially. And as a leader, you have to be able to have those kind of hard conversations with the people you're supervising. That's one of your roles. But if you're a neurotypical person that cares so much about quadball that you are willing to dedicate 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a week to this sport, and you're thinking that you're being told that you don't care about the sport, that you are bad for the sport, you're going to get defensive. And then you're going to start putting implicit words in really everything that's going on. The number of times in my life I have unfortunately heard things like, you are bullying me. You are being unnecessarily unfair. You are twisting words. And I'm over here like, can I get a single example? Like any single example of what I said that made you feel that way. And the number of times that when I say that, people are like, no, I cannot give you an example because it is an overall thing. And as an autistic person, and as I'm sure the autistic folks in the line that are hearing this might be resonating with them, that's a really hard thing to hear. Because for us who are operating in the literal, for us who don't have this implicit understanding underneath it, when we hear, no, I can't give you an example, it's an overall thing, we're like, what is that? An overall what? Like, what specific sentence did I say that made you feel that way? And then eventually maybe we get to the bottom of it and it's like, oh, it's when you said that I didn't meet my deadlines and we're going to disappoint a lot of people. And then they'll be like, see, that was a horrible thing to say. And I'll be like, what was it? because we didn't meet our deadlines and we're disappointing a lot of people. So I said that. And when you start interacting and you start having those clashes, and it becomes very difficult to overcome that barrier because both sides are accurate and correct. Both sides are incredibly passionate about the sport and the work that we are doing. But one side is attributing this social contract, this implicit negativity that the other side doesn't even really grasp exists.
I
So the
like to
best advice I could say, I'll just wrap up with this. The
yeah,
best
sorry.
advice I could say to anyone. Sorry,
Yeah.
go on, Reese.
No. No, it just reminds me of the social. It's interesting you say sort of like social contract. Personally, I've always thought of it as sort of like two people having clashing social rules and cues. So it's interesting to hear about social contract. I It's never really been a term that I've really heard before, to be honest. But it does make a lot of sense. Sorry, please go on. Hi.
No, it's really important. So the social contract, it's an overall theory. It actually, I am not creating it. It's actually created by a man named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was I believe, a French philosopher who really overall discussed how we as society are all agreeing to do things together to uphold a society. I won't steal, so you don't steal. I'm going to tell the truth, so you tell the truth. Because if you are living in this gets into the really deep philosophy, but if we are living in a post-religious world, in a world where you may follow religion, you may not follow religion, but if we're living in that world where we no longer are following laws out of fear of the church, which is how a lot of ancient civilization operated, don't kill or you'll go to hell. Now we're like, don't kill, because we don't want to live in a society where people just indiscriminately kill each other. That is the most extreme example of the social contract, but it really goes all the way down to, hey, don't litter because you don't want to live in a society where every time you walk down the street you're wading through garbage. And that's the whole thing. So when we're talking about autistic individuals and how we're interacting with the social contract, to a lot of neurotypical folks, the social contract also says, say kind of what you mean, but also in a way that isn't going to offend anyone. Whereas to an autistic mind, it's say what you mean because that's going to be the clearest way and get us all to the end result the fastest and the most effective. And it creates that clash within society.
Yeah, I think it kind of creates that clash because there are so many, in my opinion, there are people come from so many backgrounds, and there are such people interact by differently to each other. Might have their sort of similarities based on growing up in the same area, but all are kind of different. And speaking of different, I've long believed that autism is as much a different ability as much as it is a disability. Um, what autistic traits would you say help you day to day in life, and how? And could you give us a few examples of how they help?
You're absolutely right. I am a fervent believer that neurodiversity is just another way of looking at the world and another way in interacting with it. And me personally, I do have multiple things that very likely, I mean, we can't really prove, but very likely are because of my autistic nature that helps me. Like I mentioned, I have had various leadership roles across nonprofits, against professional organizations, and a lot of that has to do with my detail orientedness. I am incredibly detail oriented. I will, everywhere I go, I'm essentially seeing typos the instant I look at them, and I'm constantly wondering, how did you miss that typo? I am someone that is very into discreetly breaking down things into very digestible bites. And that's why I was a teacher, why I'm now a trainer, because the way that my mind works is what is the most efficient way to deliver this information that is not giving things that they really don't care about. I find that a lot of neurotypical folks, when they are trying to explain something, they're including background context, they're including corner cases, they're including so much information that you sort of become overwhelmed, whether you're a neurodiverse or neurotypical. And a lot of autistic folks, when they're explaining things, they're able, if they can sort of crack that code to make sense to a neurotypical person, they're able to say it in a very short and sweet way that helps make it click. So I've been able to use the way that my mind digests information to actually become a very effective trainer, a very effective teacher, a very effective coach, just because I'm getting to just that raw core content. So some mixture of detail-orientedness, clear and concise communication, clear and concise content, and then really overall interacting with the world in a different way. When you are able to sort of cut through the minutia, you can really see things as they are. I've found that I am very, very good at reading people. I can tell when someone is upset. I can tell when someone is hiding something, when someone is lying, because we can see all of those just little emotions, little just tiny inflections in their voices that even though we sometimes have trouble doing, because we have trouble doing them, it just stands out to us that much more when they're being directed at us. Unfortunately, sometimes that's how I figure out that someone's mad at me. There have been many, many times that I can tell that someone is frustrated with something I said just through this ability. And then I have to be like, well, why are you mad at me? And they're like, I'm not. I'm like, but you are. And then it becomes this sort of back and forth, which just sort of makes things a bit worse. But overall, I think there are definitely some benefits to it, some interesting abilities, and things that you can definitely utilize to help build up your own resumes and your own qualities with others.
Especially, it's fascinating to hear how you're how you can go straight into the information that is directly relevant to the issue at hand, and that's something that especially resonates with me trying to grow a podcast and knowing how to get it out there. And with around 1 in 44 adults in the States being diagnosed with autism, do you reckon the awareness of autism has improved compared to, say, 10 years ago? And what scope for growth do you reckon awareness has to grow in the States?
Great question. So the first thing I want to discuss is this concept of diagnosis, an official diagnosis. And it's really an ongoing conversation because a lot of it has to do with privilege and where you're located. A lot of autistic folks are not diagnosed. And many of those that are not diagnosed have sort of self diagnosed. There's definitely a problem with self diagnosis. If you are able to discuss things with a medical professional, it is always advised. That said, and speaking personally as someone in the United States, we in the US currently have major issues with our healthcare system. We have to put a lot of money into it legally in order to even have access to it. And then once we have access to it, we have to put even more money into it. And a lot of the way that this is determined is based on something called pre-existing condition. And if we were to go to a doctor and get it reported that, oh, yes, you officially are autistic, they're not really going to be able to do anything for us. There's no cure, there's no medicine for it. But our insurance rates might increase because we now have pre existing conditions. We could be added to official registries when, speaking quite frankly, the US government right now is not someone that I personally would want to have access to the information that I am a neurodivergent individual. So I think it is important to think about that 1 in 44 number might be skewed based on access to medical care, decisions to utilize medical care, decisions about whether or not it's even worth it. But in the overall concept of has information been growing? Is it a better place to be? I would say yes. I'd say we're moving in that direction. The first thing that comes to mind is really just the organization Autism Speaks. So for those that are unfamiliar with it, Autism Speaks is an organization. You may see the little blue puzzle symbol out there, and it is an organization designed to cure autism. It is run by folks who are not autistic, and it overall has a very negative reflection on autism because the whole point of it is we're here to take care of them and we're here to make them better and we're here to search for a cure, donate to us to find a cure, when there really is nothing to cure. And I'd say 10, 15 years ago, it was really, really common to hear about Autism Speaks, to praise Autism Speaks, to volunteer for Autism Speaks. You had autistic individuals themselves who really hadn't done the research and they're just like, oh, this is an organization designed to help autistic folks. I want to donate to them. I want to help them. But then over time, a lot of evidence came out that their definition of help isn't really helping. It was about control. It was about manipulating, and it really wasn't helping the idea that autistic folks don't have anything to cure, that we just interact with the world in a different way. And since then, there are some really other great autistic organizations out there, and I'm honestly not even going to name them because the whole point of this question is, have we improved? And we have, to the point that Autism Speaks is kind of falling into this older age of the idea of we need to cure it. We're seeing a lot more conversation about the spectrum. I mentioned that a bit ago, where we were all falling somewhere on it. Are we in this perfect utopian world where people still aren't upset? Of course not. We still see reports of parents finding out their kid is autistic and crying and acting like it's this terminal diagnosis. But I do think that we're approaching the points of understanding this is just another way of looking at a world, a gifted way of approaching with things. We're not there yet, but I would say that we are approaching it.
Would you touched upon this in your answer. What organizations or services out in the States do you feel are very supportive of autistic people? Because as you say, the awareness in the States of autism being just a different ability is growing, and I'd imagine it's only a matter of time before a wider range of organizations will start supporting and recognizing that.
Yeah, so I think the key thing to look out for is that it is run by autistic folks, that it is something that we're advocating for ourselves. So, one of the most well known and best ones that we have here is ASAN, the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. And it's all about how we as autistic individuals are creating spaces for ourselves. There's the Association for Autistic Communities. There's one that's specifically designed for women and non-binary folks, AWN, Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. So all of those are really great ones. Autistics for Autistics, A4A. I believe that one's in Canada. But there are all of these different types of organizations that are geared towards being autistic run, not being run for autistics. Because there absolutely are organizations out there that are run by non disabled folks for the sake of disabled folks. You see this in terms of like Down syndrome. Down syndrome is something where that actually could probably warrant additional medical things because there are true medical impacts to it. There's a shortened lifespan. There is a very different way that they are interacting that could utilize help. But when we're talking about autistic individuals, just in the general, there is absolutely no reason that an autistic person could not create this organization for themselves. Even with Down syndrome, I think there's some really amazing organizations out there that are run by folks that have Down syndrome. But in cases like that, it's definitely more of a joint effort, just because there are just those more extenuating factors. But especially in an autistic space, it is very important to try to find a world in which you are working with organizations that are solely run by autistic folks for autistic folks.
I have to say, Jeremy, growing up in Wales, there I've never heard of many organizations actually being run by autistic folks, for autistic folks. I reckon it's very much in its infancy here in Wales. That being said, I think that that trend of organizations being formed by autistic people, I reckon it's going to grow. Heard of an organization in Denmark, I believe, that was set up by autistic people to employ autistic people, and I think that there's plenty of growth in the States and in the UK and Europe in general for this trend. I I cannot thank you enough for
Of course.
coming on the podcast and talking about your experiences and giving just such great advice about what it is like to not only play quadball but also be a part of a social community. I'm sure my viewers and listeners to Neurodifference, I'm sure massively appreciate your insight and we, if you're happy to, more than happy to get you on the podcast again. If
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm always happy to help, always happy to talk,
yeah,
especially if you're interested in larger conversations where we can all bounce ideas off each other. It's definitely important to build these communities, build these networks, spitball ideas, and really just think about more about how are we interacting in this world, especially an evolving world that we're sort of moving past neurotypical, neurodiverse, and really just understanding that we all interact with the world a little bit differently.
absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you, and I that is the very ethos of Neurodifference. That it's mainly just it's mainly about difference in how we interact the world, as you say, and making a positive neurodifference in the world. So thank you very, very much for joining us, and and I'm sure we'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everyone.